The knock at midnight. The wind howled down the narrow country road, rattling the shutters of Clara Hayes' small brick cottage. She had been dozing in her armchair by the fire, an open book on her lap, when the sound came, 3 faint knocks, spaced so far apart she almost thought she imagined them. Her eyes flicked to the clock on the mantel. Past midnight. No one visited this far out after dark. The knock came again, weaker this time. Clara's heart skipped, a strange mix of fear and curiosity propelling her to the door. She pulled it open and was met with a sight that would bane itself into her memory. A man, soaked through, pale as the snow falling behind him, was slumped against the doorframe. In his arms, a tiny bundle, swaddled in a threadbare blanket. The man's lips trembled as he spoke. "Please, I didn't know where else to go." Clara's first instinct was to usher them inside. The baby's faint whimper tore through the icy air, and she stepped aside without another thought. The man staggered in, his boots leaving wet prints across the worn rug. Clara shut the door, locking out the storm. "Sit by the fire," she urged, guiding him toward the armchair she had just vacated. She crouched beside him, peeling back the blanket to check the baby. A tiny face emerged, pink-cheeked, eyes fluttering shut, breathing shallow but steady. Relief loosened something in her chest. "I'm Clara," she said softly. "You?" Ethan Cole," he managed between shivers. "This is Noah, my son." The way his voice broke on that last word made her throat tighten. She fetched a dry towel, pressing it into his hands, then moved to the kitchen for tea. When she returned, Ethan had pulled his coat tighter around himself, though it was clearly beyond saving. His gaze followed her every movement, not out of suspicion, but as if clinging to the lifeline of her presence. "I lost my wife 3 months ago," he began, eyes fixed on the flames. "It's just been me and Noah since. I lost my job last week. Couldn't pay rent. I tried, but—" Clara sat opposite him, hands curled around her own mug. She wanted to tell him she understood that kind of loss, though Hayes was different. Her marriage to Liam had been a quiet unraveling over the past 2 years. He'd left for a contract job in the city 6 months ago, and since then, their conversations had withered to short, perfunctory texts. Tonight, his phone had gone straight to voicemail again. "You'll stay here tonight," Clara said finally, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We'll figure out tomorrow in the morning." Ethan looked as though he might protest, but Noah stirred in his arms, and the fight went out of him. "Thank you," he murmured. She showed him to the small spare room, a space that had held nothing but storage boxes and dust until now. Watching him lay the baby down in the borrowed crib she had once intended for her own child, a dream that had never come to pass, Clara felt something shift inside her. When she returned to her own room, the house seemed different, quieter, but not empty. She thought of the way Ethan had looked at his son, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, yet holding him with such care. She had not seen that kind of devotion in years. Outside, the wind eased. Inside, Clara lay awake, listening to the faint sound of Noah's breathing down the hall. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. From Liam, "Can't talk. Busy. Will call when I can." She set it face down without replying. In the stillness, she thought about the man who had arrived at her door tonight. She knew nothing of his life beyond the storm he had stumbled out of, but something told her their paths had crossed for a reason. Whether that reason would bring her peace or trouble, she couldn't yet tell. Down the hall, Noah whimpered, and she heard Ethan's soft voice soothe him. Clara closed her eyes, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire still burning in the hearth. For the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone, and that thought, more than anything, kept her from sleeping. Hearts in the shadows. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table, pooling over 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Clara stood by the counter, slicing a loaf of bread she'd baked at dawn. She had woken earlier than usual, drawn by the quiet sounds of movement in the house. Ethan was already up, rocking Noah in his arms, the baby's wide eyes fixed on him as if he were the only person in the world. Clara watched from the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. The image unsettled her, not in discomfort, but in a way that made her aware of something missing in her own life. They sat to breakfast, conversation halting at first, then loosening as the morning went on. Ethan spoke about his late wife, Leah, how she'd been the one to pick out Noah's name, how she'd loved singing in the kitchen while she cooked. His voice caught when he mentioned her laugh. Clara listened intently, the way she used to when Liam would come home with stories about his day, back when his voice carried warmth instead of impatience. After breakfast, Ethan insisted on helping around the house. Clara found him in the kitchen later, sleeves rolled up, tightening the loose hinge on a cupboard door. It had been broken for months, ignored by Liam despite her reminders. Now, in minutes, Ethan had fixed it without being asked. "Thank you," she said, surprised at how much the small gesture meant. "It's nothing," he replied, smiling faintly. "Feels good to be useful again." Clara spent the afternoon preparing dough for cinnamon rolls, her signature recipe for the bakery she ran from home. The sweet scent filled the house, and she caught Ethan closing his eyes to inhale deeply. "That smell could fix anything," he said, a hint of teasing in his tone. It had been a long time since anyone had teased her in kindness. Later, she checked her phone. Still no missed calls from Liam. Only a single message from the previous night. "Busy. Will be a few more days." She stared at it, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before she locked the screen and set the phone aside. As evening settled in, the three of them ate together. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd shared a meal with someone who asked about her day and actually listened. Ethan's questions were simple, but his attention was complete. After dinner, she offered to watch Noah while Ethan took a shower. The baby's small fingers wrapped around hers as she rocked him, the firelight dancing in the room. She felt an unfamiliar ache, a longing that was equal parts maternal and something she couldn't quite name. When Ethan returned, his hair damp, shirt clinging to his shoulders, he took Noah gently from her arms. "He likes you," he said softly. "Babies like anyone who feeds them," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Night fell, and snow began to drift past the windows. Clara sat in the living room, pretending to read, but her eyes kept lifting to where Ethan sat with Noah sleeping against his chest. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the world seemed distant, muffled. She thought of Liam. How, even when he was home, he'd often be somewhere else entirely. How their conversations had turned into logistical exchanges, their affection replaced by polite detachment. The contrast between that emptiness and the quiet warmth of this moment was startling. When Noah stayed, Ethan shifted him carefully, humming under his breath. Clara's gaze lingered. There was a steadiness in Ethan that made her feel seen, as though her presence mattered in ways she had almost forgotten it could. It was late when Clara finally stood to head upstairs. At the doorway, she paused, watching Ethan tuck the blanket more snugly around Noah. He looked up and caught her watching. "Good night, Clara," he said, his voice low. She returned the words, her pulse quickening in a way she hadn't felt in years. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, the silence pressing in. She could hear the faint murmur of Ethan's voice through the walls, soft, soothing, directed at the baby. She imagined, for just a moment, that voice speaking to her. It was an innocent thought, she told herself. But as she lay back, staring at the ceiling, she knew better. The line between charity and connection was already beginning to blur. Lines crossed. The storm rolled in without warning. By late afternoon, the wind was bending the trees, and snow swirled thick and fast against the windows. The sky darkened early, swallowing the last light. Clara stoked the fire while Ethan checked the windows and doors. Noah slept in his bassinet, tiny fist tucked against his chin. The house creaked under the weight of the wind. Not long after nightfall, the power went out. The hum of the heater died, replaced by the restless roar of the storm outside. Clara lit candles, their warm glow casting flickering shadows on the walls. Ethan returned to the living room, his hair ruffled from the wind he'd let in while checking the back door. "We'll be fine," he said, though his voice was softer now, meant for the quiet rather than the storm. They settled on the rug near the fireplace. Noah slept soundly between them, the crackle of burning logs filling the silence. "Thank you," Ethan said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the fire. "For what?" "For letting us stay. For being here." He hesitated, then added, I don't remember the last time I felt safe. Clara's throat tightened. I know what you mean, she murmured, surprised at her own honesty. Sometimes I feel invisible in my own marriage. Liam's been gone for months, and even when he's here, it's like he's somewhere else entirely. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. You deserve better than that. Something unspoken stretched between them. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside, the air was still, thick with something neither dared to name. Ethan reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over hers. The touch was brief, but it sparked through her like a live wire. She didn't pull away. You're cold, he said, though they both knew that wasn't the reason for his touch. She could have stood, could have walked away, but she stayed. The firelight painted his face in gold and shadow, his eyes holding hers with quiet intensity. When he leaned closer, she didn't stop him. His lips brushed hers, hesitant at first, then surer when she didn't pull back. The kiss was slow, unhurried, but there was a weight behind it, months of loneliness, of unspoken longing, of wanting to be seen. When they broke apart, her breath caught. This isn't right, she whispered. I know, he said, his voice low, almost pained. But it doesn't feel wrong. The room seemed smaller now, the space between them charged. She reached for his hand again, this time not letting go. They sat like that for a long time, the fire slowly burning down, Noah's soft breathing the only sound between them. Clara could feel the boundaries she'd once held firm shifting under the weight of what they'd just done. When she finally stood, she felt unsteady, as if the floor itself had changed. We should get some rest, she said, her voice gentler than she intended. Ethan nodded, but his eyes didn't leave hers until she turned away. Upstairs, she sat on the edge of her bed, heart still racing. She thought of Liam, his clipped texts, his absence, the way he'd become a stranger in their own marriage. Then she thought of Ethan's steady gaze, his quiet gratitude, the warmth of his touch. She told herself it had been just a moment, a mistake born of loneliness and the storm's strange intimacy. But as she lay back, she knew that wasn't the truth. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been a beginning. The truth at the door. 3 weeks passed since the storm. Outside, the snow had melted into muddy rivulets that cut through the yard. But inside Clara's cottage, a fragile new rhythm had taken hold. Ethan rose early with Noah, letting Clara sleep in. She baked bread in the mornings while he repaired small things around the house, a loose stair, a drafty window. Meals were shared without the stiffness that had once defined her evenings. Yet beneath the warmth was the knowledge of that night by the fire. It had not been spoken of, but its echo lived in every glance, every lingering touch when hands brushed passing dishes or steadying each other on the porch steps. On a quiet afternoon, Clara was shaping dough when a sharp knock rattled the front door. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart picking up an uneasy beat. When she opened it, Liam stood there. His hair was shorter than she remembered, his face pale from city air. He carried a suitcase in one hand, his eyes scanning the doorway, and then the living room beyond, where Ethan sat on the couch with Noah cradled against his chest. Liam's jaw tightened. What's going on here? Clara's mind raced. She stepped aside, forcing calm into her voice. This is Ethan. He lives here. Liam's tone was sharp enough to cut. He needed help, she said evenly. He is a baby. They had nowhere else to go. Liam's eyes flicked to Noah, then back to Ethan. The silence between the two men bristled. Before anyone could speak, Liam's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Clara caught the name in bold letters, Emily. Her stomach dropped. Who's Emily? She asked, her voice deceptively quiet. Liam hesitated. Too long. She's a friend from work. Ethan shifted Noah in his arms, his gaze fixed on Liam with a kind of guarded steadiness. Clara could feel the air between them tightening, the invisible thread between truth and lies fraying with each second. How long have you been working in the city, Liam? She asked, her voice shaking now. And how much of that time was with her? Liam's silence was answer enough. Ethan stewed, moving to hand Noah to Clara. Maybe I should. No, she said quickly, surprising herself. You stay. Her husband's expression hardened. You're really going to choose him? After all these years? Clara took a step forward, her words sharp now. You chose someone else long before Ethan came here. Don't make this about loyalty when you broke it first. Liam's mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. He set the suitcase down heavily, then turned toward the door. You will regret this, he said, though the threat rang hollow. When the door closed behind him, Clara stood in the silence that followed, her pulse loud in her ears. She expected to feel guilt, but instead there was an odd, steady calm. Ethan's voice was gentle. I didn't mean to make things harder for you. She turned to him, Noah's warm weight in her arms. You didn't. You just showed me what I'd been missing. Outside, the wind carried away the sound of Liam's car pulling down the road. Inside, the fire crackled, and for the first time in years, Clara felt the air in her home was haze again. She glanced toward the window where snowflakes had begun to fall, soft and slow. Looks like winter's not quite done with us, she murmured. Ethan smiled faintly. That's all right. We're warm in here. Clara looked down at Noah, then back at Ethan. She knew their beginning had been tangled in loss and betrayal, but life had a way of starting anew in unlikely places. Perhaps this was theirs.